Merci beaucoup à la Fondation
Well,
Pierre
thank you
Fabre.
very much to the Pierre Fabre Foundation and Béatrice Garec for this invitation, and Gilles Babinet also because he has quite a huge experience in terms of emerging countries. So we're going to start introducing ourselves. My name is Arnaud Auger and Samir Abdelkrim. We're founders of StartupBRICS. Well, we are very committed to innovation in emerging countries because we strongly believe that this is where things are going to come into play in the future. And this is why 3 years ago we decided that we would start being globetrotters. Samir has more experience in Africa, and I've spent at least 2 years in India. And Samir, maybe you can say something more about your own experience. Good morning. So my name is Samir Abdelkrim, and as Arnaud has just said, we're very committed to emerging countries and innovation, startups, and digital initiatives because we believe that in the future, all this is going to be developed there in these countries. This is why we started with our startup, which is what we call StartupBRICS. We also see here that the French technology has not always been rolled out in these areas. Now, myself, I've been explored Africa. I've been there for 2 years. Arnaud, for his part, has covered other territories, and he's been going to the hub tech or technological hubs in Asia to see what's really going on. So what we wanted to do is to have bridges implemented between Africa and Asia and have a real screening of all these technological hubs and see what we could do in some countries like Brazil, for instance. So we're also having exchanges between northern and southern countries. Now, this is not the map of what we've been doing lately, but these are all the territories we've been to for the last 2 years. Now, what about what's going on? Well, so what's going on? So if we have 34 doctors for 10,000 inhabitants, well, in India and in Senegal, we only have 1. In India, 7. So as you can see here, we really lack doctors. And populations sometimes are remote populations. They're not close to medical health centers or health providers. And even though most of the population is urban, in Africa it's 41%, Asia 47%, and Europe 73%. So there is an issue concerning infrastructures, there's a lack of doctors, and very often these populations are isolated and are in remote areas. So we don't have the infrastructures which are required. In Senegal, for instance, what about the access to electricity? 56% of the population has this access to electricity, 79% in India, and 100% in France. What about the mobile equipment rate? Well, this is much better. If you look into numbers, it's 82% for Africa. In some countries, you have 100%. In Europe, you have 102%. So we have very good coverage because many people have mobile phones. So this is now developing at a very fast pace. So if we look into Asia, we see that we're almost at 100% of mobile phone coverage. And in Africa, numbers are quite good too. So this means that the population have access to mobile phones. They can send textos or mail or text messages through these networks. But they also have access to internet. And this illustrates the huge development of continents like Africa, which is now being connected to internet. We also have Facebook, Google, who are GAFAs and who are there. So I think that this is something we have to keep in mind. From a technical point of view, these projects can become mature because there's good coverage. And from an economic point of view, well, 83% of the African population has at least 2Gs. And therefore, this is a good access. It's not only economic, but as I said before, it's also technical, even though we still have an infrastructure deficit. Now, this cannot always be covered by technology. There's also another issue, which is the cost, so as to access all these resources. And this is why we went there, especially with e-health. I think that we can develop new projects. So we were sent there by the Pierre Fabre Foundation, and we started meeting project holders, at least 10 project holders who were involved in these projects and who had been selected by the Pierre Fabre Foundation committee. And we all know that the African populations are going through a difficult situation because the public investment is not really extended in terms of health infrastructures. We only have 5 or 10% of GDP of African countries, which is dedicated to these medical infrastructures. Now, we should also mention the fact that there is an upper class which lives in Abidjan, which has access to very good doctors. They can go to London or Paris if they have health problems. But if you look at the other groups of the population, they don't have any access to social security. There's no policy or health policy, and therefore it's very difficult to equip all the territory with health infrastructures. So thanks to digital solutions, we're going to be able to do that. We're not going to have people becoming doctors. We're not going to have maybe more doctors, but we're going to have more security in terms of health infrastructures and health working conditions, because we really have to see that there are areas which are non-urban areas. Well, some illness are spreading in Yaoundé or Abidjan or Ouagadougou, where we have whole groups of populations who have no access to medical care or caregivers. And therefore, this is a paramount issue. And the Liefdeman project is one of the projects which I believe is very interesting. It concerns maternal health, because we know that there are very many babies and infants who die because there is a lack of infrastructure. So the state does not have ready-made solutions for that, and financial support is very scarce. So public investments are scarce, and all these constraints mean that we have to pave the way to new technologies in these countries so as to offset this unfair situation and the negative impact of these issues. There is a kind of tsunami of counterfeited drugs in some countries. When I went to Dakar with for a specific health project, at that time there was some news which came in, and it seems that there were tons of counterfeited drugs which were flooding the market, the pharmaceutical market, and this is really tremendous. And if you look into the news, you have children who die because they have been poisoned by these drugs. So this is the kind of situation which is very dramatic, and this is the kind of constraint we have to struggle with. So when you look at these populations, you see how dramatic these issues can be. Well, now I would like to say a few words concerning what we do here. And I'm working a lot with some people in Silicon Valley because many startups of emerging countries are there. Then they migrate to emerging countries. So Farouk is one of the guys that I've really been impressed by. I think he's fantastic. I met him. He's Canadian, and he's always been passionate by health issues in emerging countries. And then he had a wonderful idea, because after working for pharmaceutical groups concerning emerging countries, he thought that he could respond to the business expectation, but also to the social expectations of these countries. And this is why he wanted to provide them with a new solution, a spearhead solution. And this is why, thanks to his enthusiasm, he has been very present in the Philippines, and he's been an advisor, an expert for the Philippine government. He has been telling them what the project would be about. And we see here that the companies like these startups can really be a relay in these countries. Now, another difference between Africa and Asia concerns the fact that startups are different. And there's another project I would like to tell you about. This is a project like Dr. Lieb in France. It's Practo, and it's an e-health Indian startup. And they have been fundraising, and they've been fundraising more than $120 million, so more than all the other startups that we have. Now, there are other important highlights here, but this has nothing to do with the health sector here, but now the $73 million we're talking about concerns of fundraising of the African startups. Now, this is something we have here for a year of fundraising. Of course, in Silicon Valley, it would only take 2 days. So there's a huge gap between Silicon Valley, of course, and these countries. Now, these are the startups that we have targeted, and we're going to talk about, and they're going to be talking about their own projects, so we know what the needs are. And with CATEL, we have been able to identify all the needs. And with CATEL and with all these projects, we believe that today we have solutions for these emerging countries. We will be able to develop and implement all these solutions in these countries and meet the needs and the expectations of populations. And they can also interact one with another. This is a showcase of what we have been doing with the Pierre Fabre Foundation and especially with e-health. So with these innovative programs, what we are convinced about is that these projects will develop because Medtrust in Morocco is a very spearhead project which is now developing in the Sahel region and which will be rolled out in the African continent. It will also be, I believe, a first milestone for further partnerships with Europe, but also with Africa, and also a first milestone for the development of e-health in all these countries. Thank you.